well. This is a great coincidence. Deborah Kirklin, I want to welcome you as well before I turn it over to Susan, but this all happened because I noticed that Susan was showing Deborah's work at her gallery, and I said, I can't believe it. I have one of Deborah's paintings that I bought about 30 years ago, maybe 25 or 30 years ago, and it was so great to see your name again, and the work she's doing is just beautiful. And so Susan, I will turn this over to you to continue with our program. And thanks everyone for being here today.
Thanks. Yeah, it's so great to see everyone, so many people. I am really excited to welcome and introduce Deborah Kirklin and Jeremy Stone, she will be in conversation with, discussing Deborah's work and the subject of mentorship, which is so important to this group. Deborah Kirklin is a Bay Area painter who exhibits her work nationally and focuses on still life and landscape. Deborah was a tenured professor at Santa Rosa Junior College, where she taught painting and drawing for many years. She earned her BA in studio art from Stanford and an MFA in painting from the University of Iowa. And one of she's exhibited in many galleries. One, of course, was Hackett Friedman. I think it was called, maybe not called Hackett Friedman at the time, which you just heard about, and that's how this comes full circle here. Deborah has been a guest lecturer at Stanford, CCA, UC Davis, San Jose State, University of Notre Dame, and Belmont. And I'm also thrilled to introduce Jeremy Stone, so glad that she could join us. She has a vast resume, as many of you probably know. She has been professionally employed in the art world since the age of 17, working at galleries, museums, and nonprofits in New York, Boston, and San Francisco. Her experience includes gallery management, curating exhibitions, serving as an art advisor, an appraiser, writing, lecturing, and it goes on and on. She's currently founder and director of Coleman Stone Advisory Services. So thank you, Jeremy, for joining us from New York. Some of the mentees that Deborah has worked with over the years have been able to join us as well. So, and one of her mentors. So I would say your name, and can we see everybody? Maybe you can raise your hand and say hi to the group. So let's see who's here. Maria de Los Angeles. Is she here? She is maybe not, a national exhibiting artist and professor at Yale. So, and some people may come a little bit later. Heidi Bruckner, who also exhibits nationally now and is a professor at West Valley College in Saratoga.
Hello.
Yeah, and I love your background.
Thank you.
Esther Trago, who exhibits her work with Chandra Cerrito and Muriel Gopon Gallery in New York.
Hello, nice to be here. So honored.
And then one of Deborah's mentors, Susanna Jacobson, a painter and professor at University of Pennsylvania and Yale University. So did I miss anybody? I hope not. Good. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to now turn it over to Deborah and Jeremy. Am I supposed to do something to turn it over? Nope.
No.
Deborah, are you going to, I could sort of begin by asking Deborah a question. Would you like
to ask me a question and get me going?
Get you going.
And
okay.
then I'll start my presentation.
Okay. Well, this is actually a wonderful opportunity because I also first saw Deborah's work so many years ago at Hackett Friedman Gallery, and I've been.
It's called Contemporary Realist. I just pulled that out of my mind when they started. So that's
it was contemporary. Exactly, it was Contemporary Realist Gallery, and it was in the same building as my gallery in the late 80s. And they were right above, on the floor above me. So I could take the elevator up anytime and go see work, including Deborah's work. So I have been a fan of Deborah's for such a long time. And I'm really interested because you are such a classical, in such a classical tradition of painting, following so many fabulous European artists. I would love for you to maybe talk about who your favorite artists were and when you started painting.
Sure, that's a great question. When I first started painting, I was looking at, traditional realist painters like Edward Hopper. And when I was 20, I went to Paris and studied at the École des Beaux-Arts, which was part of the junior year abroad through Stanford. And I was at a museum on the right bank of the Seine River called Palais de Trocadero. And I saw a Bonnard painting that was of a woman in front of a white table with a cat and a red wall. And I remember it stopped me in my tracks. And I made my commitment right then and there to not take back my art major and that I wanted to seriously pursue painting. It was like a conversion experience. And from then on, I was exposed to the Bay Area Figurative School of Painters by my professors at Stanford. And of course, people like David Park and Richard Diebenkorn and Joan Brown, and looked to them for inspiration. And it just went on from there. In graduate school, I found out about Jane Freilicker's work, who I'm to this day, really admire her use of still life and landscape combined through windows and doors. So those are a few, very few. There's always Morandi if I want to just drool,
Mhm.
but my work doesn't look like that.
Mhm.
So I will hit the share screen. And I brought this slide in. Are you just seeing one image? Good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it looks great.
This is like, we've all got to start somewhere. And I was 22 when this was taken, and painting in my house on a French easel of a scene, an interior exterior view, which is a subject that I gravitated to for a long, long time. And when I was an undergraduate, my teachers were Nathan Oliveira, Frank Lobdell, and Keith Boyle. And I met a woman in the graduate program named Susanna Jacobson, who's here today. She was getting her MFA there. And she was a great role model because up to that point, the only studio artists I had worked with were men, and they were working abstractly. And she had a great sense of adventure and experimentation in her work that appealed to me. And this is an image of the painting studio in the old Cummings Art Center at Stanford. And it was where I got to paint my first year after college, which I loved, the dramatic big easels and the light coming in, and just loved having a space in the studio. I was able to meet a professor who they hired in 1980, Christina Branch, who showed with Charlie Campbell Gallery and then later with Hackett Friedman. And she came from the East Coast. She had studied with Gabriel Latterman and was a very accomplished realist painter with very complicated scenes. And at this phase of her work, she was obviously experimenting with loosening up the definition and resolution and letting the paint marks stand for a place in space. This is a cityscape of San Francisco. Later, she did a series of images in a show called Men at Work that was at the Cantor Center of a construction site with the workers doing their thing in the construction site. And it's a theme that you see in Courbet and in Millet and Van Gogh, a very classical theme of the worker that comes out of the 19th century realist movement. She was the first person who told me that maybe I should just paint from observation. I had never painted from observation except for my very first painting class. I'd always thought that you were supposed to invent and do things from memory. And so this is an image of it's very redundant, the painting of the easel on the easel of the studio. And I did a series of work, small and bigger, that really got me set and convinced that I wanted to be a painting from life for a long time. And also this painting, once finished, funded me a trip to London and back in the early 80s when you could go there for $400. So I had a little bit of experience with, tiny shows and little sales, and I would always use them to travel. This is another painting from that time. And it kind of summarizes the juxtaposition of my temperament with the delicate cloth over the folding chair, and then this Lobdell-inspired monster green painting on the easel. That was a more advanced student's work. This is out of context, but this is Christina Branch and me at my wedding.
Oh,
A mentor is somebody who shows you the ropes, teaches you how to do things you don't know how to do, encourages you, supports you, challenges you, makes resources available, stays in touch, and does a lot of the intangible things that don't show up on a resume line. And about 2 years after, a year and a half after I graduated, I wanted to get out of Palo Alto because I really didn't have any money to be living there. And I wanted to move to San Francisco. And Christina was renting 2 rooms in a flat on Nob Hill, which she wasn't really using very much. And so she said she should fish or cut bait and turned those rooms over to me. And I moved to the city. And I think I paid $125 a month. And that was my unheated space in the city where I put together a body of work that I used to apply to graduate school. I was out of school for 3 years working to support myself full-time and painting at night and on the weekends. And although I was admitted to some other programs, I chose to go to University of Iowa, which this is my first studio view from that, the art building there. Partly because of the literary tradition there, the writer's workshop, but mainly because there was a very large exchange going on between Stanford and University of Iowa. There were teachers who came from the MFA program and went there. There were people who taught there who had gone to Stanford and vice versa. This is where I had the opportunity to be a teaching assistant for Susanna Jacobson, who's seen on the right here. On a day where she was trying to teach us how to take slides in natural light. It was very windy, if I remember. And she was just the best. She taught me the ropes about applying for teaching jobs and trying to take better slide images, lots of things about College Art Association conferences. And she was really articulate, very insightful person to have critique my work. So she and I got to know each other on these long walks home from the art department. We lived in the same neighborhood and we would talk each other's ears off. So she was only there for a year and then she was hired to teach full-time at Yale. So she was on her way to the East Coast. We were lucky to have her. This is one of her paintings. This is called Eve, Psyche, and Soma. And it is 48 inches by 82 inches, oil on canvas. And this is, I'm going to try to say it right, Mnemosyne or Mnemosyne, depending on the pronunciation you look up, which is the goddess of memory. And this one is 36 by 42. And I just love the design elements in this vibrant jewel-like color. And the idea of women painting women. When I was a graduate student, there was a battle between the male faculty and the female faculty about what I should be doing in my work. And this is typical. My first year there, that was a 3-year program, I was doing some still life and some very delicate looking painting, and I was confronted by a professor and I got really angry inside and thought, I'll show him. And so I went to the printmaking studio and proceeded to do these 30 by 40 inch black charcoal drawings of the printing presses and the interior in the studio there, and took away all the color. They were great. I loved the studio space, as I've already talked about, but it was kind of a, I'll show you, I'll do some macho work. And I got a lot of attention for that. And I was able to get teaching assistantships. And then about halfway through, I started to come back to still life, and certain people were very distressed about this because it was just viewed as weak, you know, it's too feminine. And there wasn't a lot of people wouldn't actually say that, but that was definitely a grad school thing where, you know, you had to defend what you did. And I had a senior show of work that was very intimate in nature, and I stood behind it. As soon as possible, I got out of Iowa City and went back to San Francisco. And I lived in a 3-story Victorian on Divisadero at Haight. And one of my roommates happened to be Jean C. Finley, who's a photographer, installation artist who has taught, I think she still teaches at CCA and has shown her work and been on Fulbrights. And she's a really great person to be around, just a lot of fun. And that place, I had a studio and 3 rooms on the 2nd floor, and I would just paint in the house. And this is a view to the East Bay. This, I believe it was 48 by 26. And this was the first painting that I sold through Contemporary Realist Gallery, and somebody placed it in the collection of Burt Bacharach, I remember hearing, whose popular work I love. I took liberties with the color, but you can see the theme of the window and the interior again. This is a small piece. And then I got to teach at UC Santa Cruz for a term, and I taught intermediate advanced painting and visual fundamentals, which was just a dream campus and dream students, just really creative, smart, motivated, open-minded students. Fantastic place to cut my teaching teeth and definitely helped prepare me to get my tenure track job that I got the following year. And UC Santa Cruz is where I met Heidi Bruckner. And this is a portrait of her in her studio working on mixed media. And I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I believe she was working here on recycled packing materials. And she has done lots of experiments with materials. Love this image, because there's no paint on the jumpsuit. It's just pristine. This is her painting called Tween, and it's 56 by 30. It's oil, acrylic, and paper on canvas. And lastly, Breakfast, her take on the still life, which is just wild and not too appetizing. 22 by 28. It's oil, acrylic, and ribbon on fabric. So Heidi's work, what she says about it is that she focuses on cultural allegories and norms conveyed through a collage-like juxtaposition of figurative imagery, often personifying the precarious, dark, grotesque, and sleazy side of human nature. And her work is featured several pages in an international art journal called Subo this April. And as was said, she's a professor at West Valley College. She got her BA at Santa Cruz, her MFA at University of Kansas, and she did studies at the Goethe Institute in Germany in the late 80s. And I can remember talking to her about people like Max Beckmann and the German Expressionists when I was working with her. Very talented and accomplished. Well, I got my teaching job, so the money problem was solved for the time being, and we moved to Sonoma County as a result. And the we is Robert Poplack and I got married. He's a painter, and he taught for many years at College of Notre Dame in Belmont and ran the Wiegand Gallery there for about 20 years. So 2-painter couple, mostly has worked out great. And I started doing interior exterior views from around where I was living in a real burst of energy about the 3rd year of my teaching job. And you can see that I'm definitely influenced by the Fauves and the Bay Area Figurative School. I painted all these things from observation, lots of overpainting and editing and repainting. And these are all about 40 by 48. I got to show these at Contemporary Realist, and then 3 years later, I had another show there when it was Hackett Friedman Gallery. And they were genre scenes in which I was really trying to take the everyday moments and make them dramatic and make them important. I felt like this was one way that I could approach still life without being too, what I think of as academic or too conventional, because of the looseness and the vigor of the brushwork and just the strength of color and light that I still, as a person raised in Portland, Oregon, still feel is special, California light. And then we had Sarah, and here she is at 4 months, and that coincided with my second show that was at Hackett Friedman. And now the still lifes had moved into my studio, because with a baby and the tiny house we had, there was some space that had to be given up, because I used to just paint in the house, as you could see from those previous slides. This image is by Maria de Los Angeles, who's one of the standout students I had at Santa Rosa. She came to the college at the age of about 18. She was not here legally. She was the legal guardian of one of her siblings. She had incredible drive and energy, and she is now a professor at Yale. And she got her AA degree at Santa Rosa Junior College and transferred to Pratt, where she got her BFA and then went to Yale. And what she says about her work on the Yale website is that she's a multidisciplinary artist whose work deals with migration, belonging and identity through drawings, paintings, and printmaking and wearable art. She was born in Mexico and calls New York City, New Jersey, and California her home. And she used to come in with armloads of sketchbooks where she had been drawing obsessively self-portraits and animals and figures and from memory and from observation. And I really felt like, even though she's taking oil painting, that paper and drawing were really her medium. And I want to go back for a second, just tell you what this is. This is called Valley of Dreams. It's a mural that's in a permanently installed mural in Glen Ellen up in Sonoma County. It's 12 feet by 12 feet. And this is called Citizen Dress, mixed media on canvas, 7 feet tall. It's a size 4, just in case you're wondering, on view. It was recently on view at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Arkansas. She had a big show at the Sonoma County Museum of Art that I saw, which was really, really strong. And this one is called Heaven in Bloom, acrylic on canvas, 56 by 83. And what interests me about her paintings is that she takes a lot of imagery, icons that you would see in traditional Latinx art, retablos paintings like the Madonna and Child and the Rose, and she packs them so densely, it becomes this abstract kaleidoscopic vision that's just goes way beyond any single image that she might draw in a sketchbook. I got a sabbatical in 2001, and I decided to take the entire academic year off because at that point my daughter was 5 and in kindergarten, and I figured there was a way to pack a lot of painting time in there. And also, as part of the project, we were going to go to New York and trade houses for a time. And at that point, I went into the Met and didn't expect this encounter to happen, but I went to the Asian wing and saw the Japanese Edo period screen paintings by the great masters like Ogata Korin, who painted this, and Sotetsu. And I was just blown over by not only the scale, but the fact that each iris, each flower, each leaf is painted one time with one stroke. Never mind the overlaps, but the consciousness of negative and positive space and the brevity of the mark, simplicity, and the poetry of this really spoke to me. And I wanted to start to remove traditional elements out of my work, like the horizon line and the reference to Renaissance space and cast shadow for the most part. And so I started on a series of triptychs that are oil on canvas, inspired by those screen paintings, but painted from observation of things on my studio floor. And the scale here is 48 by 108. The color ideas for the color field would come to me through, a lot of times they're seasonal, or I'd start to see a color in my mind's eye and begin to develop the work through that. There's a lot of editing out, so I put things in and then take things out, and that creates this sort of the surface of the background area, which suggests space without actually describing or depicting it. you can see the ghost image of a larger plant on the left. Just looks like atmosphere to me. Love the direct painting. I was trying to imitate that one shot direct. It's called boneless painting stroke, where you don't put any preliminary down and you just put the image in with one mark, and that's that. More recently, I got to know a student named Lois Goff, who lives in Santa Rosa. Is a self-taught artist, but she took courses for 2 or 3 years at the junior college, which is one of the missions that the college is there for, is community education. And she just wanted to soak up everything that we all had to offer her. She works now she works in various ways to support herself, but she does murals, she does skateboard decks, she does lots of illustration, and she's interested in nature, food, and folklore. She grew up in the Philippines, and she had this beautiful touch when I was working with her. This is a scene from the campus lawn. It's a watercolor. She has a website and she sells her work that way. And this is a real beauty. This is her brother in a field of dandelions, and it's 30 by 30, it's oil. And we've kept in touch. And I hope she goes to see the Kehinde Wiley show. I'm getting more to my recent work here. This is 2016. I had a residency to go paint for a month in April at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, which is near Sweetbriar College, about an hour from Charlottesville. And it's a great place. It's just wonderful people who are very accomplished, but it's very low key. So socially, it's not too difficult to crack into the crowd there. And great studio space, and you don't have to do anything except do your art. And I took paper and watercolors and gouache with me because that's more portable than oil for that amount of time. I began this journey with watercolor. And you can see I'm suggesting the horizon line in some more traditional kind of still life space in these. And the economy of means that you use in watercolors started to carry over in my paintings in oil, as you'll see. This is an oil painting that is during that period. This is 2019. Still looking at a lot of Asian art, Japanese art, taking things out. There used to be cast shadows on a floor and some other details that just all had to be painted away, which I love. I love to edit things away and take away as much as I like to put in. I have a studio. I'm in it right now. It's behind our house and it's a really nice space. But in 2020 in March, when the COVID lockdown happened, my daughter, who was in grad school and living in San Francisco, all her classes went remote. And rather than pay that rent, she moved home, and she moved into my studio building because she was a nursing student and seeing people to test them for COVID before there was vaccinations. So we were strictly sequestered. And I moved over to the space my husband paints in, which is a few miles away, and we shared space for a year. And I decided I would focus on something beautiful and immediate and get really close in and do a painting a day. And these are close-up, floral close-ups without the horizon line and with pretty much without the vase for the bouquet of flowers that I was able to show in a 2-person show at Susan Olick's in January called Move the Light. And it was Robert Pop Black, my husband, and I in a dual show. He showed abstractions, improvisations, and I showed these flower improvisations. These are mostly oil on linen, and it was all about the moment when the thing comes together and you stop. And I have to say that that's part of my work now, is waiting between things and knowing when to stop. And it's always a big quandary for painters. It's like, is it done? Do I need more? Less is more. So when is it enough? And I wanted to put Esther in right here. This is Esther Trago. She's here with us today. And she was in one of my painting classes that had a number of really gifted students, and she was one of them. and had a very strong sense of concentration and attention to detail, which sometimes in painting was hard to get beyond. But she did great. She was a single parent and she was hungry, and she just took up drawing and figure drawing and painting and made a lot of progress, transferred to UC Berkeley when she got her bachelor's degree, and was able to study with Squeak Conrad, who she made a strong connection with, who really brought her out. And then she applied to and went to Mills College for her MFA. And let me find my notes here because I want to get this name right. She got to know a professor at Mills. Her name is Anna Valentina Murch. Was a very important influence. She worked in installation and with light, and she helped Esther transition into installation. And what we're seeing here are natural objects that are wearing a skin that Esther crocheted out of thread. And what she says, I think her statement is really interesting. She says that with the crocheted thread coverings are an attempt to prop up or put back what has been abandoned or broken. Wrapping becomes veneration for the natural world. It's investigating a personal connection with the natural world. And what we're looking at here is river stones with dyed cotton, bamboo yarn, and of varying sizes. The last one is a goose egg, patched goose egg. And I apologize for this slide not being a little bit larger, but these are manzanita branch pieces that have been crocheted with dyed yarn. And she told me she's currently working on quite a large commission piece that's similar to this. And so we're going to meet for coffee. Turns out we live really close by each other and we haven't seen each other in about 10 years. So I'm looking forward to that. I got a second residency in Virginia just this past fall in September. And so while this work is very new, I decided to take branches and leaves and things from the forest there. There's a forest between the Colony and Sweetbriar campus, and just dragged it into the studio, put it against the wall, and began doing these complex compositions over color field washes, where I drew the imagery out very carefully in contour line drawings to test out the idea, the compositional idea. And then if I liked it, I would come back to these they're 30 by 22. There's a suite of them. And redraw and then repaint from observation in watercolor. So there was this looseness of the backdrop part that was gestural, and then this very, refined drawing, and then this brevity of one mark for each thing. For each leaf, there's like 1 or 2 brush strokes, which I loved. I loved the juxtaposition of that. And this is what a body of those look like together with some of the studio detritus or ephemera, whatever you want to call it. When I think about people who've given me a leg up, mentors, that female mentors have been there all along the way, going back to the person who got me my studio space, to women who wrote me letters of recommendation, to gallerists, to friends, to older friends who would come see my work, the ongoing critiques. I'm in a group of women painters in the Bay Area who look at each other's work. And you just can't do this alone, and you need support, a community. I remember Christina Branch told me that one of the challenges of being an artist was that you had to keep body and soul together, and that it was our obligation as artists to help each other, because it's a really can be very competitive world. The art world can be really cutthroat, but you have to have your ideals and your sense of giving back in place, or at least I have, to continue over this much time. These are oil paintings that are very similar to the watercolors I just showed you. These are 36 by 72, and these are all from 2023. It's a detail. This is the last slide. It's oil, same scale. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. So I'm going to turn it back over to Susan or to whomever. And
I would love to, these are gorgeous. I would love to ask you a couple of questions. Is that okay?
yeah,
These are so exquisite, and so much of your inspiration comes from nature, and in some ways, and your use of color is just sublime. You have characterized your work in the past as being feminine, and other people thinking your work is feminine, yet so much of the work that inspires you, that your work is in the tradition of, is, Vuillard and Bonnard, Fairfield Porter. They're men artists, yet you kind of have a thing about saying your work is feminine, when I feel like it's just, there's a stigma about beauty in art, isn't there?
well, I don't know if there's a stigma, but right now it's not a moment for beauty. If you look at the art world at large and the kinds of issues that are being raised, and the artists who are finally being shown, who are various, you can't really categorize what people are doing, but I would say that it's probably my own hang up that I have a little bit of a hang up about, when you're a graduate student and you're in your 20s and people are telling you your work is too soft or it's too feminine, that's bad by the modernist canon that still occurred. At the point that I was in grad school, the main form of art that was being discussed was neo-expressionism. And we're way past that now. So yeah, beauty. I was going to also say that I don't really believe there's gender in art. There are genders, all fluid, a range of gendered people making art, but I'm glad you asked me that question.
It just seems to me that there's a real return after so much pressure in the art world for people to be doing conceptual art and installation art and performance art and video art. There's a real return to acknowledging and honoring how important painting is.
I hope so. Yeah, and I think that's true. Like, one of the artists who I really love her work is Njideka Crosby, who's a Black artist from Nigeria, whose work is in the Whitney, and she does very amazing, realist, beautiful female figures in these rooms with pattern. And she cites one of her sources is Vuillard, and it's like, you love what you love, and painting is painting. And I think that it's been very interesting to me to observe how a lot of artists of color, including Kehinde Wiley, are using the language of the Italian Renaissance and very traditional means and figuration to express their political standpoint or their identity. And I think it's great.
Yeah, there's definitely a use of history and classical painting to deliver a message through beauty as well. And I think that your work is, to me, it's so refreshing to see such not only joyful use of color, but such so much drawing and shadow and compositional strength. Some of your pieces that are early, that have the studio interiors, remind me so much of Diebenkorn's studies and drawings inside his studio, with the folding metal chair and the shadows and the easel. It's just brings me so much pleasure to see the growth of your work and how much you've embraced change.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah. I've got other questions for you, but I'm curious about one of the questions I wanted to ask you earlier on was, after graduate school, but before you got your first tenure teaching job, how did you support yourself as an artist?
It was hard. I had two job possibilities. One paid more than the other, and I took the one that paid more. And I was an assistant in fundraising at Jewish Family and Children's Services for 3 years. And I lived on Deviz at Haight, and I'd walk down to Scott Street because I could walk to work, which was one of my things. I wasn't going to drive my car to work in the city. And the other job that I didn't take was to do database development at the SFNMWA, which, believe me, I was very underqualified for. So it would have been better for me in a lot of ways if I could have done that, but I didn't. That's just what happened. So I got a part-time teaching job at Palo Alto Center for the Arts, where I drive down there after work and teach watercolor painting or drawing or whatever. And then I drive back up to the Haight and go to my 9 to 5. So yeah, I painted and I applied for stuff constantly. And eventually I got the call from Santa Cruz, and that was my big break.
Yeah.
I hope we have time. I'm curious, Jeremy, how, if mentorship played, what kind of role mentorship has played in your career?
Oh. I think this is about Deborah, but I think that it's been a huge, part of, I think, my work in the arts. Is I've always been fortunate to, whether I was working at a gallery or working at a museum or working for other people that worked in arts administration, I had some really amazing people that I observed and learned from. And as Deborah's talking about, in her work, the people she studied with and the people she worked with informed, her desire to mentor, a new generation of artists and her students. And I think that it's a rich tradition. I think it's important that everybody, visual artists and most women in the art world have had mentors, if they're lucky. Some haven't, and I think that it's not a given, that kind of chemistry and that kind of being open and wanting to learn from other people is an attitudinal thing. And Deborah's very clear that, she noticed and appreciated and was really receptive to everything she had to learn from the people she was studying with. But she, I think that that's a big part of finding mentors, is that chemistry and that connection. But also, I think when you're in school, it's important. When you're out of school, it's important. I think women, in some ways, seek that out more than men do.
Yeah, I was wondering about that actually, and whether there's a difference between, how women mentor and what women want from a mentor. And whether in most of what we've heard about of women mentoring other women, is there a difference in how a man would mentor? I
think we can stereotype it. I don't think we can stereotype it, because there have been women that are teachers that are famous artists that were not supportive of other women and didn't mentor their students that are very famous, and then there are women teachers who loved mentoring their students that were great teachers that did. I don't think we could say it's a gender thing, but I don't know that it is. I think it's a personality. It's also, I don't know what you think, Deborah, in terms of teaching. What's your experience been with?
Well, I was mentored by men as well, and some of them were really fantastic and there for the long haul, and others were a little bit possessive and weird. But one of the things that I would say about what I was looking for in mentors, female mentors, I was looking for a way to have a life in art. I was looking at all my women friends and teachers to figure out, could you have a relationship? Could you have a child? I had no role models who had babies. I was the first pregnant person in my art department ever. There were a few people who had children, but they had them before, or they were men. So I was looking for that definition of a life in art that included being an artist educator and just kind of deciding, like seeing what is possible. Can you show and teach and raise a child and be married?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Those are really big questions. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, if I saw a pathway, then I would just like take notes. Oh, she did it. This is how she did it. I'm sure that's true in every field, not just the arts, but in the arts, especially when I came up, like I said, there weren't many female role models. And now there's a lot more, and it's great. And I've been to talks on Zoom with other emerging and younger women artists who are doing very well. And they're talking about having babies. They're talking about it, and it's not taboo. And I will listen to what they're saying and go, oh my God, you're going to talk about breastfeeding to this audience. It's supposed to be about your paintings, you know? And so I have to check my own prejudice because of the time that I came up in. So I think that part of role model mentoring is that you're looking for role models so you can have a life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should just open this up to questions. Not sure how to do that in terms of technology. Should people just jump in there? Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, I have another question for Deborah, and that would be, what has been the importance, do you find, of galleries in your career as an artist? How important do you feel like they've been or not been, you know, in your career?
I think galleries are important, and I really feel like if I had not been teaching full time, I would have had more time and energy to pursue the showing record in the solo show kind of way. I'm lucky because I've had a way to make a life where I could still paint, whether or not I was showing and selling. But I've always shown. I've shown in group shows, and I've had not a lot, but a few solo and 2-person shows. And it doesn't define what I do, but I've certainly gotten a lot out of getting my work out of my studio and the recognition that I have gotten to know that other people might be buying paintings. I welcome that. I think it's part of the dialogue that an artist has with the outside world.
Your husband is an artist as well. How has that helped or hindered your career?
It's almost exclusively helped it. And this is why. He and I, when our first date, which was a blind date, we went to the Legion of Honor to see a drawing show together. And we came away and we asked each other what was our favorite drawings, our favorite works of art. We each picked 2. The Corot Italian plein air landscape painting and a drawing by Edwin Dickinson. It turns out that we have a lot of, we don't have the same point of view about the art world, and we don't paint alike, but we're good critique people for each other. We're very supportive. And I'd say that our ego involvement with our career with a capital C is about the same. So nobody is a diva, nobody is a total prima donna. And that's why it works, because I think there's competition. And so that you have to find a way to brook that. But he's got a great eye, and I can do that for him. And I respect his work. I think he's a really great abstract painter. And I thought what he did with the gallery when he was gallery director was excellent. So I'd say we lift each other up. Catherine, go ahead. Do you have a question?
Hi. I was just wondering what it is about still life that sort of held your interest over the years, and why you've continued to keep coming back to it.
I'm really interested in still life because I think I imbue the objects with a personality. That's part of it. Like I feel in some ways like that the arrangement creates its own silent narrative for me when I look at the objects. Some of it is pragmatic in the sense that all the years that I taught, I had very budgeted time, and working observationally from still life was very convenient in the sense that I didn't have to drive out to a scene if I was going to paint in landscape. I really do my best abstraction while looking at things with my own 2 eyes. So I can't work from photographs, or I choose not to. And so the tangible physical aspect of the object or the plant or the pattern on the cloth is something that I viscerally connect to, and it's material for what's going to come out off the paintbrush. And and I'd say that and I've always loved still life painters by the greats like Zurbaran and Cezanne, and you just, the relationships is a little bit like music, which is something I studied when I was young. Interval, rhythm, repetition. There's something math oriented in that I think I'm gravitated toward.
Can I add something?
Yes.
I wasn't sure if I was supposed to punch something here to raise my hand or whatever. I would say I've always thought that your subject was light, actually, much more than any of the objects that I've ever seen in your paintings. I remember critiquing with you at University of Iowa, and you were swimming, and it seemed, I'm pretty sure this was you, there was a swimsuit that was hanging on your doorknob very often in the images. And the color of the swimsuit would often be this sort of bright point, but it was never about the swimsuit. It wasn't about your interior as a young person and your activities and so forth, the objects, but it was always about this just incredible suffusion of light. And I see that following all the way through, and in your more recent work, since you started embracing the ideas of the Asian screen painting, I think it just absolutely blasts through, because they do not have light in them in that way. There's a kind of light that comes off of the gold leaf and so forth, but they're not in that same way, they're not formed and presented and brought to us in light. But yours really are about this kind of luminosity, and I don't mean this in a religious way, but about a kind of spiritual notion in what you see in your vision, in how the experience that you have with these things, not as objects, but as formerly living things and things that are kind of in your life, that people your life. And that really impresses me. It's just one of the things that I think is utterly you, and very, very difficult to find. It's one thing to describe an object, it's another thing to make that kind of place and environment and light that just comes to life on the canvas more than it does in our own vision.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for summarizing that. Really, you're so kind.
I have a question. I'm curious, like, I know in the beginning when you were talking about sort of the debate when you went to grad school about, should you be painting still lifes or not painting still lifes, and sort of the split between maybe genders of your professors. But since we're focused on mentorship, I'm curious, like, what your advice is to younger artists, or to the artists that you've been teaching as they're sort of exploring and finding their way, and what might be different in the way that you approach those conversations versus how people approach them when you were in graduate school.
I think when I was teaching, for the most part, I was getting people at the very, very, very beginning, and it was about, having them go through these, like playing scales on an instrument exercises to learn how to handle materials or how to compose. And as I would work with someone, I would start to get a glimmer of their temperament, or something, some germ of a seedling that's going to be something that can develop. I don't know that looking back on my career, I've been retired from teaching for 3 years, so it hasn't been that long. But knowing how much things have changed with students now, I think I would insist less upon the formal. I would be less formal in the way that I approach student and what they want to do, and try to maybe engage more with their ideas and less with mine, because I could be a real taskmaster at times. And it was partly what I was tasked to do as a foundation instructor. But I think still life still has a place. I think it's a good jumping off point.
Thank you. We probably have time, it looks like, for maybe one more question.
I guess I would just make a comment, and that is that it's so enlightening to hear you talk about not only your work, but the students that you've mentored, and for us to see the breadth and the depth of the talent of the young artists of your work and the other young women artists that are there, and one of the things that's an objective of our group is to learn more and more, or as much as we can, about artists that are working in Northern California. And so this really gave us a wonderful view of not only your work, Deborah, but of also other women that you have taught and that are working here. And it was really just an exceptional program.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for everybody who participated and was willing to let me get some images to put in the talk. It's my pleasure.
That was really fascinating. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Jeremy and Jamie and Lorna for making this happen. It was absolutely fascinating.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Susan.
Oh, thanks for asking me. This was, I loved seeing the whole overview of your work, and it made, I have all sorts of questions about different paintings that I'll ask you later, but it was stunning, just really stunning. So
Thanks, Jeremy.
yeah, very impressive.
Yeah.
Yes, this is really wonderful learning more about you, Deborah, and it makes a lot more sense of why I resonated. you know,
Yeah.
with you. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And
Thanks.
yeah. Mhm.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. I would like to put in a reminder that the Women to Watch 2024 New Suns exhibition will remain open at the CCA Campus Gallery through May 5th. So we have gallery hours Wednesday through Fridays and by appointment. If you or anyone you know still wants to come and see that amazing exhibition, please come and see us.